Bon dia a tots, gràcies per venir i ara de seguida canvio l'anglès. La idea de la conferència avui, quan em va proposar Pere de treballar aquesta conferència, era no tant com arribar a una conclusió, no fos una conferència que arribés a una conclusió, sinó que intentés destacar o mostrar diferents contradiccions que es produeixen tant en sistemes més clàssics o més coneguts de producció, amb sistemes, com hem dit, més novedosos o que poden ser com més contemporanis o inclús per descobrir. So, the name of the conference today is more or less manufacturing and the idea of generation in terms of design. How we relate the manufacturing of the elements, of the process, of the construction process with our work as a designers, as architects. As I said before, this is not the idea of the conference today is not to find a solution or to find a conclusion on this, but just to list some questions about the fact of manufacturing and the relation of the professionals with the industry. This is a small picture that is an excuse to start the conference. This is just 3 different nests made by birds with let's say the flowers, not the flowers, but the leaves of the flowers they found. So it's a manual work, but at the end it becomes a series. So this is a bit the contradiction I would like to start with, which is the idea of the handcraft work in front of the mass production processes. So it's not one or the other, but most of the time is an in-between. I use as well some words just as excuse to try to talk about different projects. This work it reminds something more primitive, like the primitivism of some ways of working that we are dealing with. So even we use a very ancient materials. We are doing it in a contemporary way. So nowadays there are projects which are done with Adobe, concrete, or elements that we've been using since ages. But the way we use them focus on different directions. I don't know if we would call it new directions, but at least trying to see these techniques or these processes from another perspective. This is a curtain, which starts with this idea of the lightness. It lets the light go through, but at the end is a concrete element. It's a very heavy element. In this idea of this tendency or this way of working, because I'm trying to show different ways of working or different ways to tackle the project. Here is a combination of a technique that we will see later. The combination of a very standard or well-known process, which is concrete, which is a bit mixed with clay. But the way we do the window, the way we do this cut, is with a process of a parametric process. So it's a combination of a very high-end process, let's say, on that time, together with a very simple and very known process. This is one of the pieces of the facade of the Ricola building, one of the newest Ricola building from Herzog und Emerald in Laufen, close to Basel, where they use this combination of a very old system with another system, another process of construction the facade, of constructing the facade. Basically, the idea is how to do nowadays an adobe building which would comply the questions of cost and time, schedule, but we still use this idea of very old and ancient material. So these are walls that are done with a size that is possible to be transported by a lorry, normal transport, and they come to the site. It's a very simple structure, all is prefabricated elements, beams and columns, and this is going to be just a storage area, so it doesn't have very strict thermal conditions or energy conditions, but with the thickness of the element and the quality of the element, the facade complies with the requirements. The idea is that these elements have been moved with these cranes, and they still have like the signs of the transport in it, with these wooden holes. You see, this hole you see is the wooden elements that they use to transport it, and at the end they use a mortar based on the same material of the facade in order to generate, let's say, the final picture. These lines you see, they are lines with mortar which just stiffen the whole system. And some of them are real joints, and some of them are joints that comes with the process. This is a competition we've done with a young team from Lausanne, FHV architect. They used to work for Herzog und Emerald. I didn't put this image just after the other in purpose, but now I see that there's some kind of relation. This is a competition where it was the issue was to enlarge the current museum, which is a small house you see here. It's just in front of the lake. It's in Nyon. It's a city between Geneva and Lausanne. I think the UEFA or the FIFA has its headquarters there. And basically, the building was surrounded by a park and by the lake. The city of Nyon, as you see behind, is constructed, and many other cities, from an old city center with walls to a second expansion, again with walls, with stone walls. And the main concept that the architects developed, or they thought about, was to kind of generate a third wall that would be the one that is facing the lake. So the building, in a way, plays with the difficulty of being a wall, but also being to preserve the idea to preserve the park that was there. So the roof, it tries to continue with the park, and the walls they enclose, they go around the old museum. Again, sorry. For this is just to show a bit what is our task, our main task. Together with the architects, we look for the possible construction system. This is not developed. This is just a research for a competition. You have to see it just as a first attempt. So we were trying to see which were for us reference for this for this building. So other examples how earth or clay has been used. So together with all the technical requirements, or if you want the questions that are related with the insulation. So the idea was to use some kind of clay that would be mixed with some kind of, I say some kind because it was the competition level, but this would be developed further on. Sorry. Together, the first idea was to do just a monolithic wall. But the requirements, the energy requirements in Switzerland are so high that we are not able to avoid the insulation in between. So at the end, the proposal was a mixture between concrete and clay, with a double wall which works together, is a structural and is the exterior facade from one side and the interior facade from the other. Sorry. You can interrupt anytime if you have questions. This is another example. It's a bit of a cascade of projects, so it's not that one is more important than the others, but I just tried to group some projects that I thought they were having some questions in common. This is the TEA. It's a library museum in Santa Cruz de Tenerife, in the Canary Islands. And basically, here we work, well, the project was developed with the idea of course, the questions related to energy were pretty simple because, well, the weather there is quite stable and it's always around 20 degrees, so insulation was not really the issue. But the issue was how to work this wall that was structural. I have to say that I always talk about the facade in this case, or structure mixed with the facade, but it's because my main job is to work on this part of the building with other architects or other teams. So, as you see, the building is it houses different programs. On the left, you would have the library. On the right, right. The library. Left library, right museum, below at the center, photography center. And all this is linked at the urban level by a big passerelle, if you want, which links to the upper part of the city. So basically, it's the project crossed by a street, and mainly the idea, because it's close to the Barranco and it's in this mineral area. I don't know if you have a pointer. No way. So here is the upper part of the city. You can take, this is an open space, public space, and you can go down to the Barranco by this open space. So basically the relation to the ground and relation to the Barranco of the building is a very mineral and massive texture. The main idea was how to treat, it's close to the sea and to the water, how to treat on that time an image. This is not parametric yet, but it was like the first studies or first ways to try to think of a non-repetitive system of production with very different pieces. So from an image of water, it becomes pixelized, and these pixels become the elements which are the windows or the holes on the wall. So these were some models for the research. And finally, the technique is this kind of combination of high-end technology, if you want, because the holes and the windows are completely defined by your computer, your 3D tools, and it's cutted with CNC machines. But then when you come to the site, everything becomes very manual. So it's this contradiction between how to translate your ideas or even your data to the project or to the building, which sometimes it shows this contradiction. Another different strategy, which is related with the technique, I would say, is the idea of these walls, the same primitive walls as we saw, but treated in another direction, which would be all this that looks pretty simple. It's full of mechanisms and strategies which are integrated on the same wall. The same wall is activated. The elements that are composing all these structures and all these elements are prefabricated, if you want, meaning the elements which you would transport. But at the end, it's a very, again, on-site work. So you see, you can transport these elements. So the idea is that you make a structure with enough height, height of the slab, but it's really light, and it's all activated with these tubes. So it works as a radiator, as an element to control the needs of the building. Another strategy. All these strategies comes from the idea of we produce an element industrially, and which are the strategies we can follow in order that this element integrates with our project. So here the idea was to produce only one element, but that is not a repetitive system. I think at the end they were made two elements, the massive element and the perforated element. This is the Caixa Forum in Madrid by Herzog and Nemeron. Basically, it's an element which is repetitive, but the idea is to use this element, the perforated element, basically, rotating it and mirroring it in order to have 8 different positions just with one element. So the idea of having a repetitive element, which would be cheaper, but trying to create this continuous effect that you don't see the repetition. These elements are cast iron elements, and they are just hanged from a light construction behind, and they work as a filter where they are the windows. They are like they act as the sun protection. The same strategy was followed on the underground spaces. The idea of taking a perforated, in this case, stretch metal, using a press, and creating a deformation, creating a 3-dimensional element, which again is worked in a manner that with a few elements you create a continuous shape. Well, I don't know if this is the right word, but it's basically, I'm trying to show a bit of everything. So it's not that I've done everything of this. I just collaborated in some projects, in others nearly nothing, or in others I just showing it. I will show later all projects. So basically, this is the first project we did in the office, where the idea of an element which is repeated, this triangle. Could have different forms as well as the Caixa Forum, but here was already the possibility of using a CNC program to manipulate, let's say, the machine that makes these panels, in order that, again, the image is continuous. It's an image of water, but with a I don't know if it's the right word, it's a punching machine, which creates this surface you see here. And of course, in every panel you can punch differently, so you achieve completely different panels with a little more cost. I would not say how little, than a repetitive element. So the theory is that you would achieve a very, let's say, reasonable price with all different panels, but of course the processes sometimes becomes more complex. Here is again one question of one of these questions of contradiction on how the way we design, the way we, in this case, look for the parameters that are needed for this facade. This is a building by Herzog and Emeron in Jerez. And here there is a small tower. It's only four stories high. This element, this pattern element that you see, it was thought to be the structure, but also the sun protection and the facade, of course, the image of the building. So basically, it was programmed where the sun exposure will be more limited or less. So to the south it will be more opaque, and to the north it will be more open. The openings as well for the fire brigade that were needed, they becoming a fixture. There was, of course, a structural need. We would need more mass on the lower part. There were some tags that were used as an element of base of this facade. And then we started to look for these different configurations, how they would look. We did even a model, everything with CNC, and this is polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, the first model, 1:1. And then the final model, which was worked with Robert Brufau and Obiol in Moya, basically the engineers based here in Barcelona, to check that all the forces are going down correctly. There were some red points which we had to adjust. And finally, this is the final image. So this project was never built. It was only a mock-up done. It was done. It's again a bit the question between all the project is parametric, but then the construction site is analogic. So this was the mock-up was done on different finishes, and finally it was stopped by the crisis, like other projects in Spain. So again, this is an example of an element that was done in the Louisiana Museum Gardens in Copenhagen by a XN group of architects. I had nothing to do with this project, but I just wanted to analyze a bit the same situation as the Jerez project. So some kind of the basis of the project, what was needed, was not needed, and then the execution. So it's again a process with cork, the selection of materials. The three-dimensionality of the process was again very easy, but then the construction is really manual. So we achieve very specific forms and difficult elements, but again, it's somehow the manual versus the parametric. Here an example in Switzerland of, I'm mixing all kind of materials because I think it's interesting to see that the different materials can be manipulated by different ways, but also they can be manipulated with the same strategies. So here, basically the idea of prefabrication, prefabricating an element, a facade element, which it's in a building by Béard de Plathers. It's a winery building in Switzerland. So they work together with Gramazio Kohler, which are professors of the ETH Zurich, in order to program these bricks. The bricks will come like this, prefab elements, but they were not randomly placed, but they were placed in order to show an image of grapes, of wine grapes. So this kind of sun protection was supposedly made by a robot. So this element, this technique, it's the idea of which is closer to, let's say, from the project to the execution, which a robot can really place exactly where you have designed with your tools. But also, well, these are just examples from Gramazio Kohler, which is the idea of it's not the man hand, but it's a tool, it's a robot, it's an element which brings or which transfers the information from the computer to the reality. This is another difficult word, but I wanted to show one of the projects we did together with Barozzi Veiga. This is an extension of an existing museum in Chur, in Graubünden, in Switzerland, where we were faced to this quite monolithic volume, which is the museum, and which the facade, even it's so massive and so close, I wanted to express some kind of three-dimensionality. And in this three-dimensionality also to integrate some windows, which would be always together with the geometry of the facade. So at the end, the elements, the three-dimensional elements are all defined with computers, but let's say this three-dimensionality is so special, which you create, of course, foam work, but the foam work is made really manually. I don't say this is bad and the other is good, it's just different strategies and different conclusions of these contradictions between processes and execution. The good thing here is that the guys there are very good carpenters, so the joints are incredibly well done. So these are the pieces right now that are ready to be installed in the facade. I beg your pardon, Josep Maria, because this competition we did together with Josep Maria, and I use this word, manipulación. Josep Maria Miró, Nitidus, since some months we're working together in several competitions, and in this case the idea of this archive, it was the renovation of an existing building. The program was mainly 80%, if I say it properly, you correct me if not. Most of the building was thought to house information, to house data, which they have to be really in a very constant humidity and temperature level. So I think the proposal was pretty radical in terms of all the spaces they need to be preserved, or they need to be on these characteristics, on these energy levels. They were we used a massive wall with a very straightforward element which would comply with the needs. And with this element, with this single element, the idea was to develop all the different needs for the public or the public area of the building, so the one you see below. So basically it's a ceramic piece which allows us to generate a massive wall where the archives are. We create a lattice work by separating the elements and changing the size of the elements. So we create this lattice work you see here down in order to protect us from the sun. And also we used a different piece, but also from the same manufacturer. It's this idea of taking the manufacturer, or taking a piece which exists and manipulating it in a good sense, that's clear, in order to generate different status. So one is perforation, the other one is when the idea of the massive part is that we take this standard piece and we mail one of the faces in order to create this vibrant facade. So here you see some skills where this upper body is on its long facades is quite massive. It only opens to the short facades, to the cross facades, and then the question of the public area. So here you see a bit the concept of an element which is taken from a catalog, a really very well performing element, and with this means, by manipulating it, by rotating it and showing let's say the teeth of this element where we work as a lattice work, or by emailing one face in order that is glossy, we achieve this kind of results. If it's too long, Pere, you have to tell me. Here I would like to show some kind of palette of resources more than really a solution. So what is offering right now the industry? So I try to start with some kind of regressive projects in order to see now the possibilities of different materials, which we would call them new. Even I don't like the word new. No? So I don't know, textiles that could incorporate some photovoltaic cells, or textiles that have memory alloys, shape memory alloys, or photochromic elements, pigments, photochromic pigments that they react with the sun exposure. All this kind of catalog is it's always very, I don't know, it's really, you get really interested on it. But it's the kind of another palette which offers you the industry, but it's not really applicable at the moment. But it helps you to provoke or to think or to put in danger your project. So this is, for instance, the idea of a theater which the walls would change the color, or would be dark or lighter depending on the activation of these walls in this idea of the thermochromic colors, or this idea of activating a facade by electricity, transforming it in translucent or transparent. It's just it's really one thing that we cannot really work with it, but they are there. So it's another possible way of using this. Yeah, there is a challenge there. But here it's just if you want a formal application of these possibilities, which is the lower levels of the towers in New York. James Carpenter, which is a facade artist or also consultant, he was commissioned to do an active facade, which they were. It was related to the movement of the people. So the idea would be that the movement of a person would activate the colors of the facade, for instance. Well, this is a long kind of palette, which I wouldn't stop if you don't mind. It's really some possibilities or capacities to use other materials in order to be applied in a project. Some of these images are real projects as well, or the use of water. So, now I try to be fast. I finish with this kind of list of strategies in order to do a very quick overview on the idea of the relation between industry and us, or the industry and the design and the concepció of the project, as the possibility of trying to control and trying to produce everything on not on site, but most of the parts, or different strategies again of prefabrication, of preparing the elements directly on the workshop, not on the site. For that, I'm trying to show very quickly, because you all know them, but for me it was good to use some kind of, even if it's at the end, some kind of references of what have been done, and some references of what is being done now. So you all know Miguel Fisac. He really worked and developed several techniques how to make the concrete expressive. He was doing it by very simple means, but very simple and easy strategies, let's say, with plastic bags, ropes, really basic elements. But he also saw the possibility of these elements which were cast on site, the possibility of industrializing this process. So the idea of creating repetitive elements which would have more quality than on site, and which would help us to do or to build with more quality, faster, and in principle cheaper. This is the IBM building in Paseo de la Castellana in Madrid. And these are the laboratories. The idea of prefabricating by small elements. So here was really all done in smaller pieces, like 1 meter high, and they were all linked together in order to create this longer beam. And on the other side, just to take two examples of simple but not meaning simplest, sencillas, simple means and simple strategies to generate an element that could have more qualities. So for instance, the idea of using a very thin metal sheet and by giving it a shape, by bending it, creating an element that is resistant and it's still light. So this is one building for an expo that we edit. That basically the beams is just an element which is folded. So it's an aluminium sheet which is very light, and with such a, let's say, strategy, you can achieve such long spans. So basically, when he was developing their facades or their elements, it was always the idea of these folded elements which are light with some reinforcement that's clear, the insulation, and this idea of prefabricating the elements, and on the same time, again, how these elements could be prefabricated and could be brought to the site, so they could be coming in pieces and then being assembled and transported to the roof. So these are examples. This is a house that was made with Abbé Pierre in Paris as a prefabricated element which would come as well in different pieces. So like the core comes completely finished, and the other elements come later. But all the work is a work with dry, no water, a dry technique. This is again this idea of how to. This is an art piece, but I show it as the idea of integrating and thinking of an element that it's finishing itself. So these ideas of elements completely finished have been on our mind since years. This is a patent of the year 1950, where it was supposed that the houses would be removable, so you could take them and go to another place just with taking the whole element of your house. Or, well, the Buckminster Fuller attempts with the Dimaxion houses, with that the industry, the fabrication and all the elements are controlling on the factory before it comes to the place. And this example of the Nakagin Tower in Tokyo that would relate to the first patent we see, the idea of completely finished elements which are plugged into a central core. Which is what we could find right now in the wooden industry in Central Europe. This is an hotel in Austria, in the Alps. So the idea of the lack of means on this place pushed the architects to think of completely finished elements which come. These are the rooms of the hotel, which they are completely finished inside, and they would come in such elements, lifted up and integrated in the building. Other examples of the same techniques right now is again this is in Austria, or other possibilities with not thinking of elements like rooms or spaces, but more like facades, partition walls, and so on. And sorry, as I try to talk about some some yeah, some references, like classic reference if you want, and I wanted to show as a final part of the conference also references that we have nowadays that you could go out and call them and start a collaboration. But I didn't took these two because these are the ones that I like more. Or I just tried to took these two because I think they are pretty different one from each other, but they both offer you a collaboration into the project in order to that would make your project rich, and you would go further on. Without this help, wouldn't be possible. So I will talk about Bill Zahner. He's based in Kansas City, and Tony Kumella, which is based in Granollers. This is the facade of the factory in Kansas City from Bill Zahner. Bill Zahner is, I think it's the grandson, I'm not very sure, but it's he comes from a tradition of metal workers. His grandfather and his father has been working there as a metal workers, and he has developed some techniques, or he has implemented the idea of the parametric design in his factory, let's say. So this is again an image of the factory. He produces such facades. He produces these different ribs by programming with his computers and then achieving a system. So if you want, you go there and I put it as extreme. You can program your facade in front of your window with them, and they ship it to Barcelona. He works in very several fields. I wouldn't say he only does this kind of work. They really are into very different researches. One is the idea of, again, parametric designs, which they can prepare the pieces and they are just mounted on site. This is a three-dimensional piece, or they could help you developing a system by a bit. This is different elements of the San Francisco Museum for Herzog und Demeron. The different finishes with the copper sheets or trays with different perforations and different three-dimensional effects. And on the other side, Tony Kumella, which he works with the ceramics. This is a facade of our scenarium in Lisbon. So basically the idea of an industrialized handcraft process. So basically here all the pieces have a different color, a different email, in order to create this kind of brightness on the facade. So basically you sit with them and you can really develop the ideas of your project by checking it, by doing small samples, by implementing different strategies together with him. So the techniques for the stonework is they are very different techniques, but mainly extruding processes, pressing processes, mold processes, and he has the knowledge of 3 generations, so he can really direct you on the process which would be more adequate to your concepts and to your ideas. This is just, let's say, cladding wall in San Feliu de Llobregat, which he developed 4 kind of pieces, 2 open and 2 massive, and with this element he was able to create this kind of diluting wall. This is a, if I'm not wrong, like 15 centimeters thickness piece. And if we come back again to Seiner, he worked together with Chuck Hoberman, which is an architect which he has developed several strategies which use always a mechanism to activate, in this case, the facade. And the idea of this image you see here is that you would have some metallic elements between the glasses, and you would activate these metal elements that they would move one to another in order to change the quality of the light and the sun protection. Here is again the same kind of a strategy in three different positions with glasses with different fritting finishes in order to create a more transparent or more translucent glass. So, and this is one of the spheres that Chuck Hoberman has been developing. He's really an interesting person, interesting professional, which I would recommend you to visit his webpage and enjoy his proposals. Thank you.